Hello everybody, and thank you for coming along today to the Foursys Secure Tour. It's great to see you all today. One of the things I'm sometimes asked to do is companies come along and they say, oh, can you talk about something really exciting? Can you talk about something really interesting, something really weird from the world of cybercrime and the weird things? What we want to do is we want to give people nightmares. They say, Foursys don't try and scare you, but sometimes I'm asked to do talk something, and I'm like, well, seriously, is that really what you want? Do you really want me to scare you? I've got a young son. My son is 6 years old, and I am a lifelong fan of Doctor Who. My earliest childhood memory is of John Pertwee being attacked by the sea devils on the beach, and they came out of the sea and he did a sonic screwdriver, and Jo Grant next to him in her go-go boots, and she was going, poof, poof. I remember this very clearly. I was 3 years old when that was on. So I figure, my kid is now 6, it's time for him to get into Doctor Who, right? He's tough enough to cope with this. He watches Star Wars, he's comfortable with that. And so I go back to the Eccleston area, right, when the show came back with Billy Piper and all the rest of it, and he's tackling the Autons, who are shop dummies who come alive and their hands fall off and they shoot you. He completely freaks out. He watches all of it, and then he tells me, that completely freaked me out. And he has been freaked out for weeks ever since, which means that he's been getting into our bed every single night, saying the Autons. And if I even mention dustbins in the house, there's a big problem, because at one point, someone gets eaten by a dustbin in that particular Doctor Who story, in a very unconvincing piece of CGI. So nightmares and scary things can have a big impact. And I was thinking, well, what sort of things scare me? Well, I'll show you some things which scare me. This scares me. Has anyone ever seen this movie? Anthony Hopkins is a ventriloquist in the 1970s. Ventriloquism. Let's face it, ventriloquists are scary. Forget ventriloquist dummies. Someone who's devoted their life to learning the art of throwing their voice is in themselves pretty terrifying, I think. But a very scary movie, because is the ventriloquist dummy alive, or is it just Anthony Hopkins going bonkers? Hard to say. So, tell you something else which scares me, is this: children. Specifically, children from the movie Village of the Damned, based on the John Wyndham book, The Chrysalids. Is that Julian Assange back there? It could be, potentially. Very, very scary indeed. And perhaps the scariest thing of all, and some of you of a certain age may remember these, are those public information films they used to put on the TV, warning you about things like escalators. And they were shown around about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so your mother and you would be sat there as well, watching these images of people going on escalators and think, oh, nothing bad's going to happen, is it? Nothing bad's going to happen. And they would get away with stuff which you would never, whoa, never put in an X-rated movie. Absolutely petrifying. And there would be things like kids falling off pylons or touching the electric. The kids today, they never get any of this. We're mollycoddling them. We used to expose our children to so much fear. And you know what made it particularly frightening? What I think made it particularly frightening was the narration. Now, I'm not playing the narration here because I don't want to bring back any old memories inside you. But the narration was very deadpan. It was done by an actor called Ray Brooks. And Ray Brooks didn't just do the public information films. He was also the voice of Mr. Ben. What a way to screw with people's heads. So, I don't really want to give you nightmares, but there's some things you may want to stay awake about. And sometimes when I'm asked to speak about some of the more extravagant, the more elaborate ways in which you may be infected. So you've probably been to your fair share of presentations where they've talked to you about zero-day threats. And how, you could be targeted by a zero-day threat, or even an advanced persistent threat, which could be attacking you. And zero-day threats, of course, are these vulnerabilities and exploits which haven't been patched yet, but they're in the hands of bad guys, or as we know them these days, GCHQ and the NSA, to infect you. Or you hear about state-sponsored espionage. Ah, yes. And at the moment, it's all about... A couple of years ago, it was all the Chinese. Now, it's all the Russians, or indeed, Ringo Starr's wife in the Spy Who Loved Me movie. And we're hearing all the time, it's the Russians, it's the Chinese. The Greeks have built a Trojan horse, the French, or it's those guys in Cheltenham who are doing all of this. And yes, that does happen, but is that actually the thing which should be keeping you awake at night? Is that the thing which you should be most worried about inside your organization? I would argue no. Although sometimes these guys do target private firms and they may be interested in your customers, it's probably not the main thing that you should be worrying about. And similarly, you will read stories about different ways of exfiltrating data from inside your network. It's like, oh, researchers in Israel have developed a new mechanism whereby they can extract information from your computer from the radio wave emissions from the monitor. It's like, yeah, you know, we can totally geek out on this, and it's really cool, but is it actually happening? And quite often what you find is the computer itself has to be, even though it's air-gapped and isn't on the network, it has to be already compromised in some fashion via some traditional route, like someone going in with a USB stick, in order for it to happen. But you hear these stories, and again, it's like, well, it's interesting, it's fun for us to talk about, but it's not necessarily the biggest threat which needs to be keeping you awake at night. So what should be keeping you sleepless? But I don't know why that clip art is of someone's naked arse, by the way. That's a mystery to me as to why that's with two eyes, googly eyes drawn on it. Well, surprise, surprise. I'm going to give you 3 things this morning which I think your business should be worrying about. Okay, it's my job to tell you the things you should be worrying about. And later today, in fact, at the end of the day, the very last session, I think, Paul Ducklin from Sophos is going to be giving you a talk about 3 things you can do to better protect your business and your computer data as well. So hang around for that later on. So let's go through those 3 things. Number 1, surprise, surprise, is ransomware, of course. Well, you know, the cyber shit really hit the fan on Friday, to quote the meme, and I had to change all of my slides because suddenly I had to talk about WannaCry. Because of course WannaCry happened. I began to get tweets around about 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon from people saying, we've heard that some GPs are having some problem with ransomware. And I thought, no big deal. We've heard about GPs and even individual trusts being hit by ransomware before. But of course, this was on a scale which we had never seen before. In fact, it hit so hard that it took some hours for people to come up with a logo for the threat. And normally, as we all know, these days, security researchers will be working on their logo in advance of announcing the threat because they've got their priorities right. They know that they want to get the maximum branding. And WannaCry, also known as WannaDecryptor, or Decryptor, if you prefer, was doing the traditional kind of ransomware things of saying you've got a deadline, you know, we've encrypted your files, your sensitive data. If you want to get your data back, you've got a time limit, you have to pay us through an anonymous cryptocurrency, in this case Bitcoin, and there you are, you'll get it back. So what made it so different? Well, WannaCry was different because it wasn't just traditional ransomware, it was being distributed via a worm-like feature. So this component is what made it so different, and this was exploiting a Microsoft security vulnerability. One Microsoft had patched in March, but which some organizations had not yet patched against. And so it was able to exploit that patch to spread an exploit in server message block, SMB, to spread very, very rapidly indeed. And this was the kind of nightmare scenario, which actually some security commentators had been discussing the potential for this for some time, of what if ransomware was combined with this kind of zero-day threat, although, in fact, this one wasn't even zero-day, because it had been patched. So if you hadn't patched, if you hadn't applied the Microsoft patch, you had a problem. And of course, it hit far and wide. Here is a GP's surgery which got hit. Here is, I don't know what this is, a university or something like that. You can see the telltale signs on some of the computers there that they've been hit. And if your organization got hit by the ransomware, many organizations don't like to announce it, right? Your organization, if it got hit by malware, you probably wouldn't feel entirely comfortable telling your customers, oh yeah, we've had a security breach. We've been infected. We let our guard down and we got hit. And so many companies try to avoid making the statement public. Like, for instance, this company in Thailand, whose electronic billboard over the freeway rather publicly announced the fact that they'd been hit by WannaCryptor. So it happens. And of course, it ends up in all the newspapers. Here's all the quality reporting. Global hack horror, says the Daily News from America. Ransom malware hits 100 companies. British healthcare system crippled. And see, they've even pushed Donald Trump into the corner with his tapes and leaks. He's about to announce, by the way, a hoodie ban, preventing people coming into the country if they are wearing hoodies. The Daily Mirror doesn't just tell you about X Factor and secret talks to sign up Mariah. They're also saying hackers are holding the NHS to ransom. National Hacked Service, says The Sun, who rules the best at headlines. Huge NHS cyber attack paralysing hospitals, says The Eye. Daily Express, NHS chaos after hacker attack. Computer crooks demand ransom. And the Daily Mail, all the quality establishment, say Healthy Gut Diet magazine. And after that, cyber hackers cripple the NHS. I don't think there was a single British newspaper which didn't lead with the story of WannaCry. They all did it. No, they didn't all do it. The Sunday Sport. Teenage Jeremy Corbyn squashed my sister's baby rabbit with his pogo stick. And it tells the tale of Christmas morning, 1962, a very sad day for Evelyn and Pam. Jeremy Corbyn was one of their neighbours. He was 13 at the time, and apparently he was pogoing down the path, and he squashed the rabbit. That's the claim. It's quite a funny story, actually, if you read it, although not so much for the rabbit. So all the important news covered there. And it was important, of course, to get the message out, and we have to give thanks to the National Crime Agency, the NCA, who deal with big outbreaks like this, because we need a voice of reason. We need an authoritative voice which will tell people what to do, to go and get the patch, to make sure SMB version 1 is turned off if necessary, maybe to update your operating systems if you're still using something out of date. So let's go and see exactly what the NCA, the National Crime Agency, had to say about it. I think we can cross live right now to their website. Here it is. Cyber incident. We are working with the National CyberSecurity Centre to investigate nationwide cyber attacks reported today. Scroll. No, that is it. But you can share that if you want on Twitter and Facebook and email. So thank you for that. Maybe a link to a patch or information would have been useful. Who knows? So we're all grateful for that one. So the ransomware, the worm element at least, was exploiting this exploit. Someone had weaponized the vulnerability in order to spread malware very, very quickly across the internet. And the obvious question is, who could have done this? What villains could have created this exploit? The answer is the NSA in America. They developed the exploit in order to spy and snoop on people. And you can argue, and we did this in my latest podcast, we can argue that that's their job, right? To spy and conduct surveillance, and increasingly, they're having to use computers to do that, and so they may need exploits to do it. And they developed this exploit called Eternal Blue, because they always come out with fancy names for their exploits. Unlike Microsoft, who will just say MS01-070 or something, something really dull like that, the NSA will come up with a cool name instead. And fair enough, they found the exploit. They found the vulnerability, and they exploited it. They didn't tell Microsoft until a group of hackers managed to get their hands on the NSA's exploit. Yes, the NSA had failed at security, so they developed something in top secret, a weapon effectively, and they lost control of it. And this bunch of hackers called the shadow brokers, who some people prefer to refer to as Russia, got hold, I wouldn't say that, got hold of these exploits, and they began to brag about it. Oh, we've got all these exploits, including Banana Glee and all the other ones, Buzz Direction, and the other funky names. By the way, when it's a GCHQ developed exploit, because they give them names like Sonic Screwdriver or Weeping Angel. It's like, we can guess which country this comes from, guys. But anyway, so they got hold of these things. And when the NSA realized, oops, we have lost some of our data, and we know that they now know about the Eternal Blue exploit, they had to go and tell Microsoft. Obviously, they had to do that. And so Microsoft had to issue a patch. Now, most recently, what's happening is the shadow brokers, that hacking group, are saying that they are going to begin to release even more exploits, even more information, data which they've gleaned from organizations around the world, state organizations which they've hacked. In fact, you can, if you want, subscribe to a monthly update from them starting in June, should that be of interest to you. But the impact of this goes much further than a monthly members deal. The impact was, of course, the NHS got squashed. And so if you went to an NHS website, you would see a message like this, saying that they'd been hit very hard. Now, I don't want to beat up on the NHS because, you know, they do a really, really tough job. They've got a huge number of computer systems of varying ages. There's lots of different trusts. There's lots of different people involved in it. And it's not simply a case of getting rid of that old computer and replacing it with a new one. Quite often, you need to be running an older operating system or particular software in order to actually drive the MRI machine or the X-ray machine. And imagine them taking the flak for, we notice a number of people more have died recently because of this. It's like, oh yes, but we upgraded the computer because that's what we spent the money on. So they always have this very difficult balancing act to do, and it's very hard. Clearly, the patch hadn't been properly rolled out when it came through in March. So, you know, anything which can be done to patch in a more timely fashion would obviously be beneficial, but it's not as simple as it is in many other organizations which aren't the National Health Service. And the impact of this worm and the ransomware was so big that Microsoft took the extraordinary step of actually even releasing a patch for Windows XP. Remember Windows XP? It's quite possible your Auntie Flo still has a copy of Windows XP, because you haven't visited her recently, in order to upgrade her. But yeah, people are still running Windows XP years and years after Microsoft said, please, please dump it. It is insecure. But as we've come to discover, does anyone remember what XP actually stands for? XP? Extra patches. It's an easy way to remember it. So they actually released, quite unusually, an additional patch for everyone who's still using Windows XP to protect against this vulnerability. So well done to Microsoft for releasing that. Microsoft, of course, are furious that the NSA didn't tell them about the vulnerability when they discovered it. The NSA only told Microsoft about the vulnerability when the NSA realized that they had lost control of it. It's kind of embarrassing, but the NSA have had a number of security breaches. I mean, you may remember a few years ago, this guy, Eddie Snowden? Something about him, anyway. I think he took some files away from the organization and has caused no end of trouble as a result. There were other ways of protecting yourself as well. You could turn off SMB file sharing. You can just do that going into the Windows settings, should you choose to. A good way to defend yourself. And the good news was that there was a 22-year-old young guy, a security researcher, calls himself Malware Tech, and he discovered inside the ransomware there was a call out to a URL, a domain which had not been registered. And so he spent his 10 quid, he registered the domain, that's it, if you want to write it down, hope he grabbed it, and that meant that it was no longer spreading in most situations. There's still some situations where it could spread, but it certainly dramatically delayed the spread of it. Now, we have seen other attacks since, of course, involving variants of WannaCry. People have taken it and tried to fix the kill switch and other la-di-da. Nothing has had as much of an impact. But ransomware truly has been a significant threat over the last couple of years. People are used to a blue screen of death, but these days this is the blue screen that you tend to see. Something like TeslaCrypt, all your files are encrypted, demanding a Bitcoin payment. It's become so familiar. Jigsaw, a piece of ransomware, gives you a certain amount of time and then it begins to permanently delete your files if you still haven't paid up. It's like shooting the hostages. Popcorn Time takes an interesting view of things. What it does is it doesn't just say you can pay us, it has a rather more interesting, sneaky, nasty way of getting your files back, which says, tell you what, if you don't want to pay us, if you can't work out how to send us Bitcoins, all you have to do is infect 2 other people with our ransomware. Here's the link to send them, and if they pay up, you will get your files back for free. So you're now part of the ransomware gang. It's quite extraordinary. And we've even seen attacks, because you may be thinking, well, what Dumbo would click on the attachment? Who would fall for that? Well, now we're beginning to see attacks where the attackers will target schools. This is what we've seen, targeting schools and educational establishments where they will ring you up claiming to be the Department of Education. So, hello, Department of Education here. We have some very important forms for your head teacher to fill in, which have to be sent back to us by noon. Can you tell us the name of your head teacher, and can you tell them that we are sending them this email for their urgent attention? So they ring you up first. They tell you to expect an email. Then you get the email, and you're thinking, oh, crikey, more paperwork from the Department of Education. And you click on the zip file, and you open the Word document, and bam, you've been hit by ransomware. And just like hospitals, schools quite often are not properly protected when it comes to computer security because they're underfunded. So the NHS isn't the first case we've seen of medical organizations being hit. We've seen ransomware shutting hospitals in the past. Ransoms being demanded, in some cases $3.6 million demanded for the return of patient data. And we've even seen things like the San Francisco Metro being shut down because they were hit by ransomware. Now, I love how they responded. They didn't pay up. They fortunately had a backup, just like everyone in this room has a backup. And so what they did was they just simply decided to open the ticket gates and said everyone can ride for free while we're restoring from our backup. So they weren't going to pay the criminal. Love that. And now we're seeing ransomware hitting mobile devices as well. So ransomware, significant problem. But there's two other things which I think should be worrying you. One of them is this. Business email compromise, again, a hugely growing trend, and it is the way to conduct a $1 million fraud. What happens is this. A hacker poses as your chief financial officer, your CEO, or some bigwig, some pointy-headed boss inside your organization, and then they target a more junior member of staff, maybe in the finance department. And they're not sending them malware, they're just sending them an email, a carefully crafted email which tries to trick the person here into transferring money. And they simply say, look, I'm in a meeting, I'm very, very important, and this money needs to go into this bank account now. Chop, chop, chop. Can you do it? And people do this. And people transfer the money on behalf of their companies. And I'm sure as soon as they click on the send button, the transfer button, they must go, I wonder if I should have done that. I wonder if I should have done that. It's too late. You've clicked the button. Now, you may wonder what kind of wombats would fall for something like that. Truth is, sometimes big companies do, and they lose a lot of money. For instance, Ryanair. If we're talking about extortion, I traveled on Ryanair once, made the mistake of taking some luggage with me. Whew. But they lost $4.6 million, which is almost as much as I spent, when one of their staff was contacted by someone saying, hello, I'm the boss here. Why am I doing that? I hope you're not live streaming that bit. Anyway, they said, oh boy, they said, edit. They said, can you transfer some money into this Chinese bank account? And you may think, oh, why would anyone move money into a Chinese bank account? They do it if you're an airline, because you're spending huge amounts of money on fuel. So you have all this money and funds sloshing around. Someone in the finance department just moved the money, and off it goes. 5 million euros. I don't know what that is in pounds today. Changes all the time, doesn't it? Here's another one. FACC are an aerospace parts manufacturer. They work for people like Boeing. They lost 40 million euros because one of their staff was targeted, just with an email. The crooks didn't even have to be nerdy enough to write a piece of ransomware. They just sent an email. This could be the same guys who are sending those letters from Nigeria claiming to, have inherited a fortune. That's how sophisticated they need to be. They just need to be good at social engineering, at tricking you into making a mistake. And Leone, a company which makes cables, one of their members of staff in their Romanian office was targeted by someone who claimed to be a boss speaking from the German HQ. Person in the Romanian office obviously didn't know the people in the German HQ, but when she got that email, she moved the money. Because inside their company, there is a culture of you don't say no to the CEO. If the boss says jump, you do it. And that is a bad culture if you want to have proper security inside your organization. And they're not just stealing money, sometimes they target HR departments as well. Here's a number of organizations who've admitted that this has happened to them. Victims have included Snapchat. Whoever imagined that when Snapchat had a privacy scare, it wasn't going to involve all the, people's private parts, which they're sort of Snapchatting to each other, but actually their employee information, because their HR department got contacted by one of these crooks who said, can you send me the personnel database? And so that was an apology to their staff as a consequence. And you may be working out, well, how can the crooks find out who to target inside my organization? Well, the bad guys have at their disposal a website which shows them information about your organization and about who works there. Now, I thought at first this must be on the dark web or something like that, but no, it's there for anyone to access. You could even go there if you really wanted to. I wouldn't advise it. And you'd be able to find out information about other companies and who works there. It's called LinkedIn. And if you go there, you will find that your staff are willingly saying, oh yes, I work at this company, and this is my role inside this company. I'm the chief financial officer. Oh, I'm the person in charge of HR. Oh, I'm the person in charge of transferring money to Chinese crooks. Whatever the role is inside the company, it's all explained on LinkedIn. And maybe you want to maybe if you're of a criminal mind, you may want to target a particular individual inside an organization, or a particular type of individual. I did a search on LinkedIn for PAs to the CEO. And I looked just in London, and I came up with 846 results. Now, I reckon the personal assistants inside companies probably know more about what is going on inside their company and have access to more sensitive information than anybody else inside the organization, including the CEO. The CEOs don't normally know what's going on inside their company because everyone hides it from them, right? Because they'll just cause trouble. But the PA knows what's really going on, reads the boss's emails, knows what his home phone number is, credit card number details, all that sort of thing as well. So there's a huge amount of information out there just waiting to be snaffled up. And then finally, the insider threat. Something that sometimes the security firms don't like to talk about, but I think is a significant problem. So you may have problems with your staff. You may have staff who are leaving the organization, and maybe you don't have the right processes in place to change their passwords. Maybe they're leaving under a cloud and they're a little bit aggrieved. Oh, how can they possibly do this? Get rid of me. And they may do something which maybe they shouldn't. Or maybe they will take data with them when they leave as well. And then, so that's your employees who you have to worry about, okay? But then you've also got these other people, the invisible people inside your company. The cleaners, the maintenance people, the people who come in maybe from other companies to fix the water cooler, and they come in 3 times a week, fixing the photocopier, that you just kind of wave them in. But you don't really know who they are. Or the people vacuuming around your PCs at 9 p.m. at night. They have access to the USB ports on your computers. They could plug in, if they wanted to, a little keyboard login device and begin to steal credentials if they wanted to. Let's look a little bit about some of the insider threats. And I'm going to first of all say who's watching the watchers, who's looking at the security guards who are able to sneak around your building when there's no one else there, and who knows what they might be doing. The Sumitomo Mitsui Bank in London was targeted by criminals, and there was a security guard working at Sumitomo who was obviously working for the criminals. And he brought in the dead of night, a couple of Belgian hackers. I know, not your regular hackers, these were Belgian hackers. No, they probably had some lovely chocolates with them or something like that, or waffles. And the cover story was that, in case anyone found them and asked, they were just coming in for a game of poker, right? Because that's what you do inside a bank late at night. But in truth, the European headquarters of Sumitomo Mitsui was being targeted by cyber criminals, because what they were actually doing was they were going around to computers and they were plugging little devices into the backs of the computers to grab key presses, to steal credentials, usernames and passwords. You're not likely to notice that when you go in on Monday morning that someone's been round the back of your computer, in many cases, fiddling with things like that. They tried to steal £229 million, this gang. And it's only because they filled in some of the SWIFT forms in order to do the transfers incorrectly that people queried it, and the heist was uncovered. And then you've got your sysadmins. Maybe you are the sysadmin inside your organization. Now, I know none of you would ever do anything wrong, but there are sysadmins out there who might be tempted. Look at this guy. Looks a bit disgruntled. His name is Walter Powell, and he was working for an organization called the Baltimore Substance Abuse System, Inc., and he was let go. He was fired. and he wasn't very happy about being fired. So what he did was he used his knowledge of how to log in and some of the users' passwords to plant malware, password-stealing malware, onto the CEO's computer, which then gave him a backdoor onto the CEO's computer. And you can read all about this in the court reports as to exactly what he did. But it was quite fascinating, because what he did was he hacked into the presentation which the CEO was giving to the board. Rather than stealing money, he changed the slides to start to put up instead some saucy photographs, which I think has got a certain panache about it, actually. But unfortunately, he's ended up in jail, so not everyone thought it was as funny as I did when I read about it. So IT guys, you cannot necessarily trust them. And that point was really brought home to me a couple of years ago when the Barclays Bank in Swiss Cottage, the Swiss Cottage branch in North London, got targeted by a bunch of criminals. And what happened was this. A guy walked into Barclays Bank claiming to be an IT guy. He just started fiddling with the computers and the wires. But he had disguised himself as an IT. You know how to disguise yourself as an IT guy, right? You know how to do that? It's like this. Piece of cake, right? So you disguise yourself as an IT guy and you begin plugging in devices like this. This is a KVM, grabbing keyboard, video, and mouse movements, and it's got a little 3G dongle attached, which means that it's then transmitting all of that information to a nearby hotel room where the rest of the criminals are. So they're able to see everything that's going on the computers and everything that's being typed. And the following morning, they are able to log in remotely and transfer £1.3 million. And having done that, they then tried it again against Santander. Barclays managed to get back some of the money, but they're still missing about £700,000 from that particular attack. They got arrested, good, which is obviously great news. But the point is this. I've worked in large organizations, but I don't necessarily know everybody in the IT department. And if someone starts fiddling around with the cables back of my computer, I might say, hello, what are you doing? But if they go, oh, I'm from the IT department, I'm fixing something with a network, I'm probably going to leave it at that, right? I'm not going to be the arse who rings up the IT department. So there's a man here wearing a Red Dwarf t-shirt who claims to come from your department. Body odor? Well, hang on. Yeah, possibly. I'm not going to do all of those sort of authentication checks because people are going to think I'm a bit of an arse. It's not human nature to do those things and to query it and say, well, why haven't you got your badge, Graham? Because I never bring my badge with me, because I always forget my badge, because I'm right? So people don't question that kind of behavior and they allow it to happen, which is why these kind of attacks keep on happening. As I said, Santander got hit as well, but they caught them, and click. These are the guys who they caught. So, I think I've overrun. It's easy to get depressed. I've given you lots of things to worry about, and that really wasn't my intention. Days like today are a great opportunity for you to get together and share your knowledge and speak with your peers and share your experiences. And there's some great talks lined up during the rest of the day, which I hope you'll stay around for. And as I said, right at the end of the day, Paul Ducklin will be talking. I've been talking about 3 things to keep you awake at night. He will be telling you 3 great ways in which you can better defend yourself as well. Tips which you can use, whatever products you might be using. So we're working together, all of us, to make the internet a safer place. And there's one real message I want to get across to you. It's don't have nightmares. Thank you very much.